what was conspiracy 1 year ago is now taken seriously, right? Okay, so you connect the dots. You have one of very few shows that is still really giving voices to different opinions, where everything else is scripted. You know, there is always push on one side of the story, and this one single guy is actually getting more popularity than most of these media outlets combined, and suddenly there is an attack on him. And now Hey, this is Mike Sigala from TruthTheory.com, and welcome to another vlog. So today let's talk about Joe Rogan. Why everyone is trying to cancel Joe Rogan. And just very quickly before we're gonna start, check out patreon.com/TruthTheory and become a supporter, because this content can be only created thanks to people such as yourself. So go to patreon.com/TruthTheory, check out different options there and become a supporter. And in this way, you help in funding content such as this video, and you support independent activists and independent media. Now let's talk about the topic. So just quickly to recap what recently happened. So we know that, for already a while, a couple of months, mainstream media were attacking Joe Rogan podcast and Joe Rogan himself in all sorts of ways. And basically, people say that he's spreading misinformation online, or that he's an anti-vaxxer or whatever. So a lot of the criticism is around some of the guests that he had on his show that have alternative perspective on the whole COVID situation, right? But very recently, this whole situation developed into a completely new, full-blown attack, where literally this became one of the most talked about stories in recent weeks. And this really peaked when Neil Young, American-Canadian singer, said that he wants his music pulled out from Spotify because Spotify is promoting Joe Rogan, because Joe Rogan is spreading misinformation, etc., right? And it's important to mention that currently Joe Rogan podcast or Joe Rogan Experience is exclusively hosted on Spotify. Okay, so here is exactly what Neil Young said. I want you to let Spotify know immediately today that I want all my music off their platform. He continued, they can have Rogan or Young, not both. And then this escalated, and more artists announced that they want their music out of Spotify. And this spread through the news and mainstream media, which resulted in Spotify share price going down. So it created a lot of mess on all levels. Okay, so let's unpack what's happening here step by step. So we have the Joe Rogan Experience, a podcast with over 1,700 episodes exclusively streamed on Spotify. And Spotify allegedly paid $100 million roughly to get Joe Rogan to join Spotify exclusively. And really the podcast interviews all sorts of fascinating figures in all different fields, often people with alternative views, so it's unscripted, and some of the episodes got tens of millions of views. So you imagine the power here, right? Some episodes are like 2-3 hours and can have millions of views. That's extremely rare for anything of this length, where we're talking about, podcasts, interviews, shows. Another interesting thing is that really Joe built this media empire on his own, and maybe with like 2 other assistants. just using virality aspects of social media, YouTube, etc. Right? Now, on the other hand, mainstream media shows and outlets are in constant decline, while more and more people want to listen to unscripted conversations with people who have just different opinions. And the funny thing is, CNN has been in decline, and they are one of the biggest outlets attacking Joe on a regular basis. Not only his show is more popular than a lot of these mainstream media shows, but also most of these media companies have some kind of ties with big pharma. So, advertising deals, funding, etc. Right? And a lot of allegations are around Joe or the show spreading misinformation about COVID. And if you look at these mainstream media organizations that are attacking him, a lot of them have some kind of ties with Pfizer or other big pharma companies.
Brought to you by Pfizer.
CBS Health Watch, sponsored by Pfizer.
Anderson Cooper 360. Brought to you by Pfizer.
ABC News Nightline. Brought to you by Pfizer.
Making a difference. Brought to you by Pfizer.
CNN Tonight. Brought to you by Pfizer. Early Start. Brought to you by Pfizer. Friday night on Aaron Burnett Out Front. Brought to you by Pfizer.
This Week with George Stephanopoulos is brought to you by Pfizer.
This weather report brought to you by Pfizer.
Today's countdown to the royal wedding is brought to you by Pfizer.
And now a CBS Sports Update brought to you by Pfizer.
Meet the Press Data Download, brought to you by Pfizer.
This portion of CBS This Morning, sponsored by Pfizer.
On how to find the hidden sugars in the American family diet. Sponsored by Pfizer.
Now, another interesting piece of information is that a lot of people started pointing out that, for example, James C. Smith, former CEO of Thomson Reuters and currently a chairman, is on the board of Pfizer. So I'm not gonna say there is any relationship between this fact, but you connect the dots. So what's happening is that we have one of very few voices that have enormous popularity, are unscripted, present second side to the story. They give voice to experts on different sides who often do not fully agree with the mainstream narrative. And a lot of these experts are top experts in their fields, people with impressive credentials. The thing is that these topics are very complex, so people should be allowed to hear opinions and different viewpoints, right? If you aren't allowed to hear an opinion of some experts on a topic that is complex, not black or white, then you are not really living in a free world. And interesting thing that actually Joe pointed, he said something like this, that the problem with the term misinformation is that a lot of the things that initially were considered misinformation are now taken seriously, right? So for example, if you look at the beginning of the pandemic, everyone was saying that the origins of the virus are from the wet market, right? And if anyone said anything else, like for example, another idea was that maybe it's a leak from the lab, then immediately people were called conspiracy theorists, censored, etc. And 1 year later, a couple of months later, Biden is openly talking about this other option as a possibility. So what was conspiracy 1 year ago is now taken seriously, right? Okay, so you connect the dots. You have one of very few shows that is still really giving voices to different opinions, where everything else is scripted. There is always push on one side of the story, and this one single guy is actually getting more popularity than most of these media outlets combined, and suddenly there is an attack on him. Another interesting thing recently is that around the same time when there is an attack on Joe Rogan podcast, some videos emerge where he was actually using the N-word and using some racial slurs, and suddenly the attention goes into, on a different side, calling him a racist, right? So such a interesting coincidence that this didn't come out last year or 2 years ago or 6 months ago, but at the same time when he's already getting attacked from every way possible, right? Interesting coincidence. Most of what he said was taken out of context, but people don't look into that. They're gonna read these headlines that say, oh, Joe Rogan's racist or whatever, he's using the N-word, and straight away that creates even more hate and willingness to cancel him. Obviously he apologized. There is true that he had at least one incident where he sounded racist when he was talking about some incident in Philadelphia, but that's a clip from 11 years ago. He apologized publicly. He said he has not been using these kind of words for a very long time, but still, this escalated into now everyone trying to cancel him. And you see, the problem with cancel culture is that most of these people that want to cancel him are probably not saints themselves, right? Most adults have things that maybe they are ashamed of, maybe they did something 10 years ago, 5 years ago. So no one is perfect, right? You cannot look at someone because of one thing or two things or something that this person did 10 years ago, and suddenly you just hate this person, you don't agree with anything, you want them out. This is not how things should work, right? How about we look at everything as a whole, right? So think about how many good things he did, how many bad things or whatever, things that you can point something out, and look at him as a whole. He inspired millions of people to take care of their health. He gave voices to people exposing corruption, exposing how wars are staged. He gives alternative perspective on complex things when we are being fed just one side of the story. So this is the problem, people are gonna cherry pick something and then, oh, let's cancel him. I hate this guy, blah, blah. And I'm sure a lot of these people are far from perfect themselves, right? If someone is admitting to mistakes, I think we should look at it, because not many people, especially mainstream media outlets that are attacking him, rarely, when they make mistakes or they spread misinformation, they rarely apologize themselves. And if we won't be allowed to hear the second side of the story because everyone's gonna get censored or cancelled, you're just gonna be fed one-sided propaganda and you won't be able to make any informed choices and decisions. This is my perspective. I'm just giving you some bits of information here to look at it more objectively, but it's up to you to do your own research, to check what's going on.